Hi, it's Dallas Cothrum. Welcome to another edition of If You'll Permit Me. Today we're joined by the President of Omniplan, Tip Housewright, also a former member of the City Plan Commission, to talk to us about all things Dallas and Dallas City Hall. So Tip, thanks for coming aboard.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So I know you're a UT graduate. You've practiced architecture for now many years. Omniplan's been around, since 1956?
56, right.
Y'all are famous for your work at NorthPark and many other places. Why don't you talk a little bit about Omniplan?
Well, it's just a great firm with a great legacy and great history, and been involved in great projects here in North Texas and beyond. You mentioned NorthPark, but the founders of the firm designed the first few phases of our convention center here in Dallas. Involved in the Dallas-Fort Worth Regional Airport when it was founded back in the 70s. Long-time relationship with Republic Bank back when there was a Republic Bank, involved in the towers there. And then, in recent years, we've been able to move on and do great things like the Liberty Mutual corporate headquarters in Plano.
We worked on you with that.
Exactly. Lots of great work at NorthPark, as you mentioned, but Highland Park Village, working for some of the larger churches here locally, continue to do a lot of commercial work, multifamily work. So it's really, really proud of the practice we've created.
Y'all do great work, and really, I think y'all are keenly aware and focused on placemaking, and not just the people in that building, but also the people on the outside. I think I really enjoyed collaborating with you on Highland Park Presbyterian.
Thanks. Well, what you said about placemaking is one of the things I hope sets our firm apart. We spent a lot of years practicing in the regional retail industry, which was basically the shopping mall industry, and that whole industry was driven by experience and by the customer's point of view.
It's why NorthPark's so great.
Exactly. And it was driven by understanding what it was like to be in the space. And we try to carry all those lessons forward into the work we do now, because the work we do now all has a planning component to it, all has a placemaking component to it. No one wants a freestanding building in a cornfield. They want a fabric around that building. They want an experience around that building. They want a place. And so that's really what we strive to create on all of our projects.
Well, I think you did that on the two in Highland Park Presbyterian and in Highland Park Village. You've got a very traditional neighborhood, and you had 100-year-old buildings effectively in a neighborhood that doesn't change much since the 1950s. And you came in and really refreshed those, but paid homage to the past. So talk a little bit about how do you weave that new and old?
Well, there were a couple of things going on at Highland Park Village that were important to us. One was authenticity. It's a great word. There had been some work, not a lot, but there had been some work out there that wasn't, frankly, up to the quality of the original architecture, and you could tell. You could see it. It just didn't. It didn't. Just have the depth and the character and the detailing. And so we needed to return to that authenticity with whatever we did. Mm-hmm. And then another really significant observation I thought was that really the vertical architecture was quite beautiful. It was extraordinary and well maintained and well cared for. The ground plane, the fabric that stitched everything together, was nothing special. It was just ordinary sidewalks and ordinary curbs, an ordinary asphalt parking lot, and just nothing terribly memorable or up to the quality of the vertical architecture. So we encouraged the owners early on to start thinking about what we're finally doing now, which is bricking everything, doing much more of an urban design approach, flush curbs, extending the same paving material from the parking surface over to the sidewalk to kind of unify everything.
You were on the Plan Commission for the Republic of Lake Highlands for a number of years. I don't think a lot of people understand what a huge commitment and time that is, and how that's where zoning happens in Dallas is largely at the Plan Commission level. So, talk a little bit about your community service you did on the Plan Commission.
Representing District 10 was, of course, the most important thing I did. District 10 is largely, a suburban district, and it doesn't have the volume of commercial development that some of the other districts. Mm-hmm. So my cases in District 10 were typically of a residential nature, maybe a high-density residential nature. we did some small commercial. While District 10 was my priority, I spent as much or more time on cases in other districts around the city, just getting educated on them and thinking about them, trying to add value to the debate. There was always plenty to do.
The commission sort of had a tradition over maybe the last 20 years. I know before you, there's sort of there have been other architects, and y'all often are called on to arbitrate.
Yeah.
Good. Is this good architecture? Is it going to contribute or not? Yeah. Bruce Birnbaum was a good example, right. a prominent residential one. Y'all didn't serve together. How do you help your other colleagues on there with architecture when they're maybe in a non-technical field?
One of the most important things is don't use architectural speak. Keep your words. Use words that laypersons are going to understand. I think talking about it from an experience standpoint, I think it's much easier to talk with a broader range of people about experience than it is about, well, aesthetically this composition is better than that composition. And then I think on the topic of architecture at CPC, we always have to remember the CPC is about land use. It's not about architecture. Right. And so what it looks like, that's a very slippery slope. You got to be very careful about that. What it feels like, what the experience is like, what the impact on the surrounding neighborhood. Now that's all fair game, I think.
It is, and you've seen a lot of that since the 1980s in Uptown. That's what differentiates PD 193 and its zoning cases from others, because PD 193 is a lot more concerned about the how it feels than necessarily what's in the building. Do you think there are things in Dallas that the Planning Commission's regulating that they don't need to regulate?
I never understood why we were spending time on cell phone towers. Just made no sense to me.
Everyone wants to talk on them.
And we tended to spend the most amount of time on them in neighborhoods that were underserved from a broadband perspective, neighborhoods that were economically disadvantaged, and we were sitting there arguing about these cell towers and how else are they going to get service? And it was putting the students at a disadvantage in those areas. And I didn't get it.
It took years for Dallas to allow the cell carriers to co-locate on Encore than TXU transmission poles. Uh-huh. They were still making you do zoning cases. That's great for us. We're okay with that.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think that the city ought to be more progressive on ball fields. They'll let people, if there are already lights up for football or baseball fields, they'll let them just by right go in and put up a tower. We worked with you on many a thing. You get some challenging infill things in Lake Highlands. Now I know we did one on that David Weekley deal that you're seeing some pretty urban, more dense single-family product in Lake Highlands.
Right. And people sometimes don't understand it. They jump to the conclusion that it's something that it isn't. Specifically, they jump to the conclusion that it's a high-density, affordable housing thing. It's just amazing the assumptions people make. But
it's harder in Lake Highlands because you have so many larger homes on larger lots that what I've found is people they are only comfortable largely with what they live in. And if it's not what they live in, why would anybody want a patio home? It must be bad.
Yeah, it must be bad. Right. But what's interesting is when we permit those projects, when we approve them, we make sure they've got adequate parking, we make sure they've got green space, and the market buys them. Faster and higher prices
per foot than the traditional houses.
Right, and I think it provides housing options in the district that are needed.
And I know your firm's working on a number of multifamily projects. So what do you think of the market?
Well, it's just mind-boggling. We didn't do multifamily till 4 or 5 years ago, but we've hired people that have the capability of doing that. We're working with some great clients. We're working in a pretty broad range of projects. We've got high-rise projects we're working on. We have your traditional sorts of wrap projects, both in urban and suburban environments. We also have some really interesting infill projects, like over near Bishop Arts. We were doing a deal on Zang Boulevard. We're doing some things in East Dallas and the fringes of Deep Ellum that are more of the 75 unit, 125 unit deals instead of the 300 unit deals. And so those are interesting. They're a little more creative, a little more challenging on the site planning. So.
I hope more people will do those smaller deals than the institutional 300 plus. I know we find those challenging. They're usually hard zoning cases because they're small sites. Mm-hmm. Often they're pioneering because there's not multifamily, and that can be challenging. Do you see that? You think that's a trend that we're going to see more of?
Well, the demographic, and the economics just seem to continue to favor multifamily. And I know these developers are looking for sites everywhere. We get inquiries, and from various clients that, look at this site, look at that site, and, never would have dreamed they would be looking at that. Some of these sites are pretty challenging. So that tells me there's just still a lot of demand for it.
Clearly, 1,000 people come into this region every day, and they got to live somewhere. And we find that, the numbers support when people move to a region for a career change, they don't always buy a home immediately. They're not sure what neighborhood they want to be in, or schools for kids, or church, or other life factors. And I think multifamily is really a good vehicle for that. And people can try on a neighborhood, so to speak. How do you create that sense of place when maybe it's just a green field and it doesn't exist?
Yeah. Well, it's about green space. It's about edges and street edges, urban design, just about being thoughtful beyond just the building itself, but the environment it's sitting in. Just find some way to influence that. Find some way to impact that. We worked on a suburban wrap deal in Phoenix recently, and rather than have totally enclosed courtyards like a typical wrap would, we buried the garage within the complex where you don't see the garage, but we opened the courtyards to the views of Camelback Mountain.
Oh, wow.
And so the courtyards were three-sided with buildings on three sides rather than four sides, so you had better ventilation and a hot climate, and you had better views to the mountain ranges around.
That's the same thing that you see a lot of these mixed-use projects that one of the key aspects, at least in the multifamily, is that you are by office and retail and restaurant and all these uses. I was really proud of the work we did on the Union. I think you were on the commission when that came through. And that's a good example of all those uses working well together and creating a place that someone really, can feel like I have my own little neighborhood in one square city block.
Right.
So do you find it interesting when you're doing suburban work that they really want to import urban?
It is. It's fascinating. Yeah.
People move to the suburbs to get away from the city, and then they want to drag pieces of it with them.
Exactly. We're always trying to create these little fragments of an urban environment out in the suburbs. And whether it's a corporate headquarters, they may elect to be in the suburbs for demographic reasons, their proximity to workers. But they
Economic
incentives, thank you, yeah. But they want a walkable environment. They want to walk down the street to get a bite to eat. They want to have an option to live 2 blocks away. They want to have a park out in front of the building. All these sorts of things that you would find if you were in uptown.
But it's challenging to pull that off. And how do you make it authentic in those areas?
It's really hard for budget reasons. Often just the speed that the project is progressing, the scale. In these. Let's say you're working on a corporate headquarters project, that's going to be a giant building.
Right.
And that's not always conducive to creating a great pedestrian.
And it may not be one that it may be a corporate campus where they don't interact with they don't want people from the general public coming to them. It's secure. It's a secure area.
We're seeing, I think, if
moved away from
started to move away from that. Great example, State Farm headquarters up in Richardson.
Right. Yeah.
And what they did that was so strategic there was rather than capture all of their food service inside of their buildings, they put it down on the street and anybody can go to it. And it's
better for the merchant.
Yeah. And so we were involved in that project, designing the street experience and the retail experience and the food, park, et cetera. And so I thought that was a fairly creative approach.
You have to have some residential to support the housing. People don't want to drive as far.
Yeah.
Or do you think this is a good trend?
I think it's a great trend. Yeah, because I think it just increases the quality and increases the sort of the richness of the. It makes the land use less one-dimensional. We've all been to office parks where it's just office building after office building after office building. It's just dead.
What's happening in the world of office? I know that's a sector you guys also work in. Is COVID going to have? Do you think people are going to make office starts? And are y'all as architects having to rethink what office is and how people are going to use them?
We're still going to need new office space. I think the businesses in America are going to continue to grow, and so there's going to be demand for office space. Now, I think the nature of that space will tend to be different. I think I hear a lot of conversation about the hybrid workplace and flexible workplace where people are working at home some and working at the office some. And when you do that, then it places a really big need to create collaboration space at the office. So you're maximizing those hours in the office. And so if everybody comes to the office and then goes to private offices, that seems self-defeating. I think you'll see much more interactive environments, much more of a hive. I'm in the office 3 days a week, not 5 days a week. And so it's all about these conversations with different people and creative thinking and collaboration. And then maybe the quiet time, the heads down work is done back at home.
Is that working at your firm?
We have got most people back, but we still have some at home. We're being flexible. We're allowing people to work at home some.
And there's some people that do better at home.
There's some people that do better at home. Our business is fundamentally a creative business, and I still feel like that being in the office is the best way.
I think ours is too. We're about creating a strategy, and 5 or 6 good brains working are better than one. And I think of Zoom and all these other tools, Blue Jeans, I think you guys use. Those are all great tools, but that it's not the same live interaction. I mean, I didn't go on a first date with my wife by Zoom. Maybe I should have. I think they're good tools, and one thing I do really like is they're very efficient on a project where we're just doing a weekly meeting, and we don't have to drive 45 minutes and have a meeting. It really gives you more work time. And I think we are all aware of that. So I think that's a great trend that I hope will go on. We're finding neighborhood meetings are done, or people like being able to stay at home, but also attend the neighborhood
participation
people.
That way.
Yeah, that's not always good in our line of work, but for sure we do get more participation.
Right.
What are your thoughts generally on what make good zoning cases? This is you talking as a plan commissioner, and what do you think developers miss on things, or why you saw people get beat?
Well, I think all the commissioners are dealing with tons of information. You get a packet with anywhere from 400 to 800 pages of information every 2 weeks, and that's just an awful lot of information to absorb. So I think an applicant first and foremost has to be clear what their ask is. And you'd be amazed, there's projects and you're reading through the reports like, what are they asking for? I don't quite, I can't find what it is. What's the ask? So being clear about the ask, is really, 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 really important. And then I think being realistic about what you're asking for. The cases where they come in and they just think you should just roll over and just approve their case just because they're there.
Those days are over.
And because of who they are or because of what the neighborhood is or what, no, you need to provide a rationale for why, we should go from this FAR to that FAR or why we should ease on, give relief on a setback or something. I need a rationale. I need to know what the result of that will be and why that's good.
Yeah, I think that's another issue of in PD 193 that they've done a good job at the Oakland Committee for many years, and you've seen probably how we have that scale where what we're asking for and what we're providing. We're asking for more floor area, but we're providing publicly accessible open space. We're providing affordable housing that because I have a lot of good developers who really do contribute to the community. They do want to build a project, obviously, and it has to make money. Sometimes it's educating neighbors and neighborhood groups about there are some positives to change.
I've seen the zoning cases where people they're opposed to it just because it represents change. And if you sit and say, okay, so if this doesn't happen, then that old parking lot is going to just sit there.
When people go on vacation, they're willing to try new food and new locations and all sorts of things. When they come home, they play it so safe that they miss out on good opportunities.
Yeah.
And do you think Dallas is missing opportunities, or do you think that it's generally doing pretty well? And particularly when compared to the suburbs, do you think that the city's holding its own?
I think that we need to hurry up and either ease up on our parking regulations or just eliminate them.
Yeah.
Because I think
trust the market.
Trust the market. We're still building too much parking. Even in urban areas, we're building too much parking.
Fort Worth's been progressive about it, and it doesn't. I mean, I completely agree. You were on a commission that did reduce it for some land uses.
Yeah.
But there's still way too much for office.
Yeah.
And for most things, there's also not enough reward for sharing. Solve for parking is something you and I both spend a lot of time on, or our people do.
It's one of the first things you do. In my business,
Yeah.
is figure out, okay, what's my strategy to get enough parking on this site? But I think the parking deal. Honestly, I wish that our architecture in the city was better. When I go even to Austin or San Antonio, I see architecture that's more adventurous, that the client community is more interested in something that's more unusual.
And standing apart from others?
Standing apart, yeah. And I think that Dallas would benefit by thinking like that.
You think that's changed some, though, in the course of your career?
I definitely think that architecture particularly commercial architecture, has gotten better in Dallas over the course of my practice versus what it was several decades ago. But I still think we could be doing more.
Dallas really has some challenges in competing against the suburbs. Can you talk about that and what you see in your architectural practice, where people are making choices? Maybe they're not even considering Dallas for industrial deals or corporate deals.
I think there's certainly good things happening in the city. I think, as we all know, we need to be building more housing. Of
every type,
of every type. And I think that the city honestly needs to be more liberal in terms of what it approves to be built, so that we start reaching the numbers that we need to reach.
The city talks a good game about affordable housing or single family for rent or any of these concepts, workforce housing, all these things. Right. And then when we try zoning cases, we often get told it needs to be someplace else. Yeah. I still am looking for that place.
Right.
And we look hard.
Yeah, it just seems to be two contradictory conversations.
And your old district you represented is a tough one to work in because there's a really very low tolerance for anything other than traditional single family. Right. And it's not like there's going to be new land produced in Lake Highlands.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think density will come sooner or later.
Yes, or the city of Dallas won't grow, and the census numbers were not particularly positive for Dallas. I mean, maybe better than last time, but not. We're not getting the growth that Collin County sees. And at least for me, a lifelong resident, that's troubling. What do you think really is the differentiating factor of why people choose Omniplan?
Well, we talked about our planning and design approach, about experience and about placemaking. But what I like about our firm that I believe sets ourselves apart is that we are at a scale where a client can deal with the owners of the company, and we can provide the same services that our very, very large competitors can provide, but we can do it in a much more high-touch, personal sort of process and relationship than a large departmentalized corporate firm.
Tip, what do you find are constraints that hold back projects that maybe our developer clients don't always foresee?
Well, it's really paying attention to what I call the pre-development process.
Yeah.
So it's, of course, all the site due diligence things, but pretty rapidly you start discovering zoning and what zoning issues might be present that need to be addressed. I'm working on a project right now where we think we're good and we can build by right, but we're not sure. And
we'd love to help.
It can affect your how much money you spend. It can affect how much time you spend. So getting someone like you, Dallas, involved in your team early on to sort all that out can be really, really key and can save lots of time, lots of money later on.
We really find that people spin in what I call month zero.
Yeah.
Everybody has these timelines, and they're all predicated on starting. Often, if you don't have, like in the one you mentioned, if you don't actually have a project you can do by right, then it's like Candyland. I'm going to go backwards on the game board. And most of what we do, whether it's zoning or permit expediting or our TABC work, it has to be done right the first time. And so we're organized like a city, like with city people or former city officials to try and help catch those things earlier. And I think you're right. That pre-development thing is where you've got to be the most precise because it predicts the future of when you'll actually finish.
Right.
What are your thoughts about building inspection? The city's spending a lot of time and money on a system that I don't think they really understand. I think only people that are customers at building inspection, and frankly, I'm there some, and I know you are too. It's really the people there every day fighting it out in the trenches. Do you think it's fixable?
Well, I hope it's fixable. It's complicated, but it's a real problem, and it affects the economic health of our city. It affects the reputation of our city. It affects ultimately the experience of living here for a homeowner trying to get a remodeling permit or a permit for a new home. I think it's a bigger issue by and large than the citizens realize. You hear some of the leadership talking about it, but I think it's a big deal.
Have you ever heard clients say, "I'll never do a project in Dallas again"?
I have a client right now that has never done a project, and they're a very notable client. It looks like they're getting ready to do one, but I don't think the experience has been good.
Dallas right now has very high building permit fees, and as compared to any other municipality in the state, and really not as responsive, and it takes longer. That's just not a good business paradigm.
It's not. It takes longer and more expensive.
You can't run a business that way. And they're dealing with business people that I know a city is not. It does many things beyond being a business, but it's not being responsive to the development community. And I think if you go to many of the municipalities, it's very predictable. If we submit plans on this date, we will get comments back on this date. They're professionally given, and you can hold timelines.
I think some of it is in these other cities, there's a presumption that you're professional and that they can grant you the permit. In Dallas, there's this presumption that there's something wrong, and they're going to fight you all the way.
Yes, they don't. That's exactly right. There is a difference of they make assumptions that, well, this civil engineer is signing and sealing it. It's their reputation and training. Right. Same with the architect. Right. In Dallas, though, it is it's non-collaborative. And
I hear that the people that do QTeam end up not really saving that much time. They spend more money, and
we're finding right now that we're sending just as many conventional. And the QTeam now doesn't want to grant grading permits. They only want to give you a full permit. We don't have a lot of clients that build the top floor first. Do you?
Yeah.
If y'all are building the top floor on the building first, you should get a lot more work. Yeah. You don't need the structural and all that done. You need a demo, and then you need excavation and grading. I mean, all this can be done in sequence, but QTeam's not doing that now. I think it's a real failing because it just doesn't. It's real hard to explain to a client why we can't get the permit for the first thing first.
Well, it shows a lack of understanding, a lack of interest of what the real issues are that the development community and the people that want to build buildings are facing.
Thanks for joining us on If You'll Permit Me.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoyed it.